So we are live. So we are here on Monday night with whatever his name is up in the corner, JR. That's his name, I think, Mr. JR. We're here with the CEO of Astra Energy, Ron Lowden, and we're here with Frank Benedetto. Nice to have you both here. You guys are affiliated with Astra Energy. Just so you kind of get a little background about us. By the way, this is not legal advice, not financial advice. We're not recommending or suggesting that anybody purchase anything, but we're providing information. We think this is an interesting company, and they've been in an interesting position financially that kind of applies to a lot of the people we speak with. So we thought it would be an interesting thing to do tonight. So that's kind of the setup for it. And before I get started, quickly, vampires love Bud Light. Excuse me. Oh, God. Vampires love Blood Light, but only from long neck bottles. And there is a fine line between a numerator and a denominator, but only a fraction of you out there will understand that. So we're here with the, and I guess Frank left or had a difficult time before we started. I think he's been in and out a couple of times, so that may be a harbinger of things to come. But we will start off with Ron, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are currently?
Yeah, I came on as CEO of Astra Energy Inc. about 90 days ago. Prior to that, I have been involved in the renewable and clean energy business for 15 plus years. I spent 7 years in Brazil in the kind of mecca of wind and solar, which is the state of Sierra. I've always had an interest in renewables. I think it's a great time for them. Obviously, it's a great time in the news for them, but practically, it's a very good time for renewables in that there's solutions in other businesses that can be brought or amalgamated for current practical solutions to the problems that we have today. So for instance, you can take water filtration out of Lancer, a subsidiary of Coca-Cola, and apply it to your waste ponds where you're taking the solids out through a Fisher through an American turbine, and then you can deal with the liquids from a method in the beverage industry. So it's just a really good time for solutions in the renewable space, which has now hit its stride as far as mainstream. So it's a good time for this. 15 years ago, we were all talking about this by ourselves in a room. So it's right. It's a nice time for it.
So you said you've been with Astra for about 90 days or so?
90 days, yeah. I was an original founder a couple of years ago, but I again, a timing thing, and timing specific to the company came on about 90 days ago. I had watched one of the subsidiaries that we purchased for several years, which was Regreen Technologies, and there is something very unique about it, and I kind of led the charge on Astra acquiring it. They had a backlog of development and customers and good IP, in my opinion, and so that was I was involved in that about a year ago, but I never took an officer position until 90 days ago. I just felt it was a good time for that.
And you're kind of, so your background, I was reading your bio a little bit, but your background's in renewable energy, and you're also, I guess, we're a real estate developer, or are a real estate developer?
Up in Canada, I did probably 15, 20 years of real estate development, buildings downtown Vancouver, mobile home parks across Canada. I had a lot of businesses, entrepreneurial. I built a film studio. I was the first one to do a green screen feature film with a graphic novel and a video game sequel to it back in 2003, 2004. So ahead of the curve on that. That was nice.
Have you been involved before Astra, have you been involved in any public companies?
Yeah, and it hasn't been, it's been an education, I'll call it that.
So
Yeah.
you kind of because we spoke about it briefly, kind of where our interest might lie. So if you could weave maybe your history into that story a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, what was first evident stepping into the public fold? I mean, I got a taste for it. I went up to Alaska and I staked some property in 2005. Came back and bought my first stock. It was Canadian zinc. It was 9 cents, and the Hunt brothers built it and spent hundreds of millions of dollars. And the book value of the asset was so much higher than what it was trading at. So that was my introduction to it. And since then, it's been more of an education than anything, because I think when you're an entrepreneur, you don't understand when you enter the markets that there's two things going on, more than two things, but two very basic things. You have a business and operations to run responsibly, and then you have to address the market, because that'll eat you alive if you do not address it. And I made a lot of mistakes historically with regard to that. I didn't think it was important, and it really is. I mean, if your stock's down to 10 cents, you can't do a financing. If you've got no liquidity or price in the market, you can't go to a higher exchange. I mean, there's all kinds of factors and limiting factors involved if you do not attend to your market when you're in a public company.
Let's go back to something you said earlier, that when you first got introduced to being on a public company, you just said this. You indicated that the book value was so much higher than what the share price was trading at. What were your thoughts on that at the time when you first got introduced and you saw that kind of discrepancy? What were your thoughts?
It just introduced that there's another job to be done when you're involved in the public markets, and that's communication and communicating your value and being aware of everything you do. I mean, you file an 8K. We're QB, so we're fully audited, fully reporting. You have to file stuff, full disclosure. And if you do not do that properly, and you don't have a wide reach and a good shareholder base, you're exposed basically to not getting full value out of your company or going in the other direction, possibly.
Interesting.
So we were referring, I guess, previously when we were talking off, we were talking about the toxic notes. So, and we understand that with Astra, there was that type of note and it had to be resolved, or you did resolve it. In your prior experiences with public companies, did you have any prior experiences with those type of situations?
That specifically. So when I came on, the first thing I did personally, I just paid off that note. I think it was a $68,000 note, and I paid 93 to pay it off. So they make tremendous money on it. And if you don't, you're really in trouble, because what they do, and they don't, this is what happened to me in another company. I had a stock that was trading at $2.45 in one of my prior companies, and it was a good company backed by real estate. So the equity on price per share was backed solidly with real estate. And I took out a loan from a group that I felt very comfortable with. They were connected to a research and development company and a university that I wanted to be part of and have them work with us. And they were young guys, and everything seemed very, very good. And it wasn't them. It was the people behind them that gave them the money, so that fronted it. And they were basically fronting for these other people. And they shorted the stock because it was at $2.45. And I had a safety, because I was cautious, at $1. Well, if it goes below $1, that clicks in. I thought, well, we're $2.45. It'll never go before $1. Well, 27 cents later or 30 cents later, they've got a clause to dilute at the 10-day average, and now they're looking at it was a $600,000 note, converting it at, and I kept the structure nice and tight. We had very few shares out, so basically they could take over your company.
Right.
Fortunately, I scrambled and just paid it out, but it was so much stress, and everybody in the company, because of that decision, all the shareholders, stakeholders, were at risk because of that decision that I made at that time. So when there was these debts, you don't know who's watching them, who's involved in them, who's behind them. I mean, it's a real terrible part of the junior exchanges in particular, as we talked about earlier. So there's no
by the way, were these experiences in Canada or United States?
United States, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So let's inject a question there. So how did you come to realize that the initial borrower wasn't the folks that were giving you the money?
Well, I was tenacious. I phoned and phoned around and phoned behind them and phoned market makers and phoned, and they said, man, you know, that's not who you're borrowing from. They don't have any money. They borrowed from somebody else.
Right.
And, you know, so it was actually the people behind that used those people that were, you know, young students, positive. I don't even think they knew what was going on. So that was a prior business, nothing to do with this one. Of course.
Did they mislead you directly or just didn't give you the full picture?
You know, ultimately I'm responsible for that decision. Did they mislead me? I'm kind of, at that time, I would say I was more trusting than I am today. I'm seasoned now. And I just, like, when I see it, it doesn't matter. You can't say anything about it. If there's a convertible debt on the books, just get rid of it.
Right.
Otherwise you have exposure. So why have it?
I'm afraid to ask him the question of his opinion about the company that ends with a vest. So I'm not going to ask him that. So did you have more than one experience like that before Astra?
That was the one in particular that was a hard lesson, and because it cost a lot to get through that. We're still actually fighting to get back to where we were on that one. But I just, you know, I don't need to put my hand on the stove twice. And this was a simple one, but it was. I don't think it was with very good people. This was actually a worse loan. So we paid it off immediately. I did. And
now you're referring to Astra?
Yeah. So
okay.
Astra is nice and clean.
There's
no long-term debt in the company either.
Who were the lenders? If you remember.
I remember. You know, I don't like.
Yeah, let's not put him on the spot. That's fine. That's fine.
They're paid out and they're gone, and see you later. That's
all right.
Was it
a private company or?
No, you know, it's a private company, but it's a former incarnation of a previous lender that's very popular out of New York. And yeah, you know, they're terrible.
I'm happy to answer that.
Just terrible.
You were going to say, what were you going to say, Frank?
Frank can answer that if he wants.
I'm more than happy to elaborate on that because, you know, we've been in a battle with these guys for years on many companies. The lender, and it's public knowledge, was 1-800 Diagonal. And that's the Kramer crew, Kurt and Sean and those guys. And, you know, they have a certain MO how they work. They sign the note, everything's friendly, and immediately you start seeing pressure in your stock. You know, a lot of these companies have hundreds of millions of shares out. This one, there was 14 million at DTC. So it's pretty easy to see that the DTC is not changing, yet the stock's going down. There's a lot of pressure. And do I have it 1,000% on paper? In fact, no. The odds are that's their MO. Let me back up a second. Years ago, and I can say years ago because I've been around for 25 years on the street, when a firm did a financing, they went at risk. They put their money behind the company. They helped you run the company, and their capital was actually at risk. That's changed. The new way of doing things is pre-sell the deal into the market, develop a derivative, and then use that derivative to cover your short, and you got a riskless transaction. And then on top of the derivative, they get a 20 to 50% discount to the market, so they get 2 bites at the apple. And that's just unacceptable. That's why Ron jumped in. He paid it off before the maturity date. This way they didn't get any conversions. And now we're having a battle in the market because if I could just look into the trading for a second, I got involved back in July. End of July, Ron, he goes by Rigatoni on Twitter, one of the best stock pickers I've ever met. He told me, Frank, I know you're heavily involved in Clean Vision. You have to look at this company. So when I took a look at it, it was similar, but in a different area of green technology. And then when I saw Hulum, the energy systems, I'm not a technical guy. To me, turning on the computer is a struggle. But I have a gentleman that's one of my guys, been with me a long time. He goes by Doc Ock on Twitter. It's Dr. Jim. He's a electrochemical engineer who's brought many technologies to the market. And I had him take a look at the Hulum technology, and his first response to me was, "Frank, it can't work." I said, "Why?" He said, "It goes against the second law of thermodynamics." I don't know what that law is. But then he spoke to Ron, and he went further into the research with the Hulum guys, and he came back to me and said, "Frank, buy as much of this as you can. This works. This is a breakthrough technology. It's Nobel Prize worthy type of technology." So we started buying the stock. Jim put his money where his mouth is. He owns hundreds and hundreds of thousands of shares already. We started speaking to Ron.
I'm going to take you back to the, because our interest is more in the Kramers. So
Okay.
if you there's a bunch of videos we've done about the Kramers in regard to GTII. So so Ron, we do know what, because if you look in the dictionary under scumbag, the Kramers are listed under that name.
They are.
They're worse also, in my opinion. If you knew all the background, not just like the financial transactions, if you knew all the background, you'd be amazed beyond what you already think of these guys. So these guys aren't just crooks and immoral, they're really disgusting. And in essence, they're just out there trying to kill companies and kill
they think they're gangsters.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to some degree, they're safe, right? There's been very little enforcement action. It's a bitch to kind of to go after. I mean, I'm sure, as you could say, Ron, how much time and effort did you have to spend in dealing with that as opposed to running your company? And I'm beyond the cost. It's just the energy drain, and it delays whatever you're going to do. And it's not like there's some great underlying purpose for what they're doing. There's not a lack of liquidity in the market. It's just an opportunity to make money and to kill companies.
It's funny.
It's greed. There's nothing else to explain it. It's just plain old greed.
It's rats and cockroaches, because when you look at a company that has legs, like the possibility of doing something extraordinary, there's more money in having it go forward. So that's just small thinking. That's just shadow thinking, that kind of thing. So in this particular instance, a company like this has we're diversified. We've got 3 different divisions right now. Any one of them's big enough to take this thing to the next level. So it's just small thinking.
Yeah, but again, it destroys companies. So how, without disclosing, any attorney-client information, anything like that, how did you decide to pay off this particular note?
Well, wasn't it based on the experience I just told you about? I wouldn't go forward with it. And Frank, who was very well respected and referred to me by Ron, who's a very good friend of mine, wouldn't touch it with that in the way. So it was an obvious decision to come in. And my decision to come in was a timing thing. So for the first time, the Regreen technology had a working demonstration at one of the top waste sites in the United States, in California. The restrictions are the highest. So that just arrived. That was part of my decision. Hulum just arrived at a full working independent demonstration in his shop. The African projects were just kind of arriving, where they got land signed over and an MOU signed and PPA discussions going on. So the company needed some leadership and some help at that time. Those things happened all at the same time. I was talking with Ron, and who introduced me to Frank. That all and that was the decision. I think that the timing for this company is good right now.
Can you tell us a little bit about what Regreen does?
Yeah, so there's the waste to energy business is a huge business. It's obviously a global problem right now, and taking the waste and either upcycling it. Recycling's fine. Upcycling's better. You take waste and you make pellets that you can sell for $20 for a 20-pound bag, rather than getting for carbon black, a ton of carbon black, $300. Well, if that carbon black is upcycled into water filtration pipes or anything, You get 1,000 times more revenue. Also, because it's a big problem right now, waste, they'll pay tipping fees on the way in. So the municipality or the county or the state will legislate paying tipping fees. California is $60 a ton. So California passed 1383. They lead the states usually. 1383 means no organic waste is going into your dump, no waste from the restaurants, no piles of leaves out of your yard. None of that can go to a municipal dump without treatment right now. A MRF.
Yeah, I got an extra trash can. So I've
well, this is the thing. So not only now, if you can manage that waste as a technology like Regreen does, and I'll talk a little bit about why it's unique or why we've identified it as unique. Not only do you get paid on the front end, a tipping fee for managing it, if you can make something out of it, like biofuel, there's all kinds of levels, diesel to jet fuel, or you make clean burning pellets, like in Africa, those pellets, they use them in their wood stoves. They use them every day for everything. They pay 20, 40 pound, 100-pound bags they pay. And so you don't get $300 a ton. You get $3,000 a ton if you bag it and send it out wholesale. So, the Regreen system has a couple of unique attributes that apply directly to that California 1383. And the first is, it's not like the two-stage system or the one-stage system of pyrolysis. It's a two-stage system. Pyrolysis has been around for a long time, dependable, Germany, everywhere. They take waste and they make biofuels out of it. And some of it's good, some of it's really low grade. That's common. Well, what the Regreen system does is takes the waste first, pulverizes it, homogenizes the size of it. When you burn wood in a fire, when you start it, it's all smoky before it gets hot and the temperature gets hot and it's all pieces of wood. When it gets hotter and it's all coals, you'll notice there's no smoke coming off it. So you homogenize the waste. This first stage system, it's kind of a dryer, will take the moisture content down to 2 to 5%. Well, then it burns at a higher temperature. Well, if it burns at a higher temperature, there's more energy in it. It also takes it to a very, very high point without burning it. So it leaves the kilojoules or the energy in the material, which again, homogenized waste, very dry, like Canadian wildfires, and a high burning temperature, more energy. It also sterilizes the waste. So you can have hospital waste, let alone municipal waste. And because it dries it, takes it to a very high temperature without burning it, it sterilizes it. So when you do go to burn it, there's no harmful or poisonous off gas. Now that's super interesting because California has the highest emission standards on the planet, and it exceeds those standards. All of that waste, plastics included, that burning off gas from burning exceeds California emission standards. Now imagine taking that and mixing it with coal. Up here in Canada, we've got the huge cement companies. They're the worst polluters on the planet. Nobody talks about it. Carcinogenic waste that cannot be removed. It just can't. You know what they do? They run a pipe further out into the river and they dilute it with water. And that's how they handle it. So imagine now taking, there's West Virginia, there's 6 coal mines, coal generating plants shut down. All 6 of them are shut down, 6 out of 6. Imagine if you could take municipal waste from that state and the neighboring states, sterilize it, have it a high energy, dry to raise the burning temperature material. When you raise the burning temperature, like a Fischer-Tropsch oven out of Germany, high temperature, you eliminate that off gas. You actually can produce methane, propane, and butane, but you could conceivably, and conceivably, you could mix that to dilute that coal and burn municipal waste. So managing and create energy and light up those plants again. So it's a really interesting, I followed this system for over 10 years and compared it to other systems. So we acquired it, including the IP 100%. And there's the possibility, because it's scalable, 15 ton per hour systems. And because it's a 2-stage system, if you just wanted to not do the pyrolysis and just pelletize it, the pellets can be burnt for energy. The pellets can be burnt in wood stoves. The pellet could be dumped into cement to dilute cement. So you can scale it and you can have different outputs with it. So it's an interesting system for our time.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that Brian and I are much dumber than you, obviously. So I understood about every fourth word. I think Brian about every third word. So, but I understand generally. It sounds like it's a very positive influence on the environment.
Well,
and
it is. But look, having been around this for 15 years, if you can't make money at it, it's not going to get adopted. You have to have something that's positive for the environment that you can make money at.
Right.
Tipping fees go in, revenue comes out of this one. So both ends.
So now that so the fact that you've paid off the toxic debt, now you can kind of forward and try to make the company grow. And
yeah, I mean, it's the stage of the timing's always a thing. The whole on a macro level, obviously, renewables, but the company itself, the timing was good. Like I say, the demos are just up, and they needed some management help. We need to get rid of the toxic debt. We need to build quite a bit more. There's no long-term debt in the company at all. So a very simple structure, 75 million shares, no long-term debt. All of our people are vested. Everybody that came in took shares in lieu of getting paid, most of them. So it's a committed team and a good start, a really good start. Yeah.
Wonderful. We wish you certainly the best, because it's the best for everybody. I'm going to shift over to Frank a little bit in the dark. Frank, so you said I don't think we've ever met, but you've been in the business about 25 years.
Yes, sir.
Have you faced the shorts or the toxic lending issues prior to Astra?
My first experience with the Kramers was back in 2003. A little company by the name of Unique Pizza and Subs. They took an $8 stock and turned it into a 0008 stock. So I got a pretty good welcome home party from them. But their methods have remained similar. They've altered some things to get around regulations, but with this particular company, it was interesting because when Ron paid off the note, I told him to make sure that you track that wire from point to point, and which he did. And when he actually paid off and we got confirmation from the bank that it hit their account, we put out an 8K. We got an irate call from Seth and Kurt claiming that our 8K was fraudulent. They didn't receive the wire. They were going to put out an alternative 8K saying that, we lied for the most part. So once Ron convinced them and he showed them the tracking that they got the wire, then they came back and said, okay, you're right, we got it. That day, Richard, that very day, 6 new market makers showed up in the stock that had literally traded by appointment up until that point. CFGN, INTL, OTCN, VIRT, ASCM, who we all know, all of them jump right on the ask and start hammering away.
So you think they're kind of like standing behind the Kramers in essence?
Well, what they do now, quote unquote, naked shorting is tricky because it's hard to prove. But what they can do is they bring in all these different market makers, which can all be the same person. Anybody can be a market maker. If you have capital, you can apply and be a market maker at any firm. So what they do is they hide behind the bona fide market maker exemption and they short without the locate and they just keep peppering away at you. And anybody that's in the stock right now will tell you this thing trades dirty as can be. End of the day, they have all the black trades between market makers, bringing it down, not honoring buys and sells that go through. We have people that have bids in 10, 20,000 shares. They walk right past the bids and market lower. It's really crazy, but accumulation is the name of the game here. You keep accumulating, they can't hold you down forever.
That's Ham's motto. Just accumulate leads to price rises. That's what he says. Have you guys had an opportunity, or since you've been involved, have you had opportunity to deal with FINRA, the SEC, as to Astra, or tried, or anything along those lines?
Well, the first thing we're doing is we're going to spin off the Regreen division. We've already announced it. It's in process. Regreen is going to become a standalone company. And obviously, as you know, once we do the spinoff, we get a share count because we have to have the shares reconciled to spin off the division. Ron and I have also discussed a plethora of other options. We've seen other companies try one particular method or another method. We're going to use them all. Spinoffs, buybacks, dividends, whatever we have to do, we're going to keep hammering away until we get these guys to get out of the stock, because they've called him repeatedly, offering him new financial products. This type of Series C convertible, we'll take this debenture. And Ron just basically told me the other day, we don't need money. We're not taking anything toxic. We're not diluting the stock. And then the pressure ratcheted up. We saw 150,000 from CSTI on the offer, which we know doesn't exist. Ron Rigatoni's guys have about 5.5 million. My guys are sitting on 9.5 million. So that's 15 million shares of a 16 million share DTC. Doesn't exist. So it's the hocus pocus that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, we unfortunately, so we kind of arose out of MMTLP, that location, and we started taking on the fight. So unfortunately, we've learned a lot about all the slimy methods, but ultimately it's the regulators that are not enforcing the law. It's the DOJ that's not prosecuting the criminals. And, in essence, we're talking about stopping innovation, but if it's like a cure for a disease and the company goes out of business, it has a much more dramatic impact on society. And again, those characters, the Kramers, Lynn Partners, probably a whole litany of companies that you could mention, Frank, I'm sure. And I know, I see Ham talking about LLCs. It's funny to me. So I think of LLCs as just a way of, holding an entity's ownership. It's not good or bad, not necessarily. Just like a corporate entity's setup is not good or bad, but these guys misuse those entity formats to escape personal liability, to do whatever they want to do and move on. And so it's not necessarily just that form, it's kind of what they do with it. Have you, Frank, since you've been in the market, for quite some time, have you seen a change in terms of the amount of, let's say, nonsense, I'm going to use that in quotation marks, nonsense that goes on in the capital markets?
Well, it's morphed as we've gotten older. For myself, when I was younger and I was a broker, the shenanigans you used to see were brokerage firms doing IPOs, and they would separate the units. They would give the common to their shareholders or their clients of the firm, and the CEOs and everybody else would take the warrants and split them out between all their straw accounts and their buddies. Now, don't forget, when I first started as a broker, that was the Stratton Oakmont days. So those kind of crazy IPOs that were basically worthless and being run up and down by Duke Capital and the Wangs and everybody else, it was a different world, but illegal nonetheless. But it was a lot more transparent. You knew what they were doing, and eventually they got caught. Now you have so many different avenues of electronic market makers overseas, UK, Asia, all these different areas it's coming from. The SEC, they can't police what's happening here. Never mind what's going on in the Cayman Islands and overseas. But the biggest detriment that I see is this bona fide market maker exemption. You have literally 30 or 40 firms on some of the bigger issues, and every one of those market makers can short without a locate. So it's just, they just pepper these stocks down and they wear retail out, and eventually retail gives up. That's typically what happens. You have the anomalies like GTI and Finger. You have the most psychotic bunch of shareholders that refuse to ever give up. The pigs are just, they're a freak of nature, okay? And I mean that from the bottom of my heart lovingly. These people will not give up. They will not sell their stock, and they are just so committed to this battle, right, wrong, or indifferent. They are as dug in as I've ever seen a shareholder base. MMTLP, same thing.
I was going to say the MMTLP crowd is kind of the same way.
Different fight, but similar.
Let's get some questions in there. So, Frank, one thing, we don't refer to it as the bona fide market maker exemption. We call it what it is, the Madoff rule.
Madoff exemption.
Named after a criminal.
Yes,
so Frank, one of the things we talked about with Ham last night was kind of, Ham this for 20 plus years. And one of the things that we talked about was, you know, what has changed in terms of the fight from 20 years ago to kind of where we're at today, using the backdrop of Senator Crapo literally questioning Gary Gensler on specific to MMTLP and counterfeit shares. So how do you kind of see how things have evolved in this fight to fix the markets for retail over the last 20 years?
Well, let's start with the original point. When he questioned Gensler, the guy froze like a deer in the headlights. I've never seen a congressional hearing when they question somebody and they don't say anything. He just, I mean, he might as well have been McConney. He just froze in front of the camera. You know, his words a lot of words came out of his mouth, but he didn't say anything. So how has it changed? It's gotten worse because as technology gets better and their reach expands, meaning it's not just one guy in an office on Wall Street. Now he's got offices in London, Singapore, Tokyo. He can bounce these trades all over the place. You know,
well, I'm talking about the movement. I mean, I'll give you an example. A year ago, last year, this time, Richard and I didn't even know who each other was. We had no interest in going on YouTube. I'm talking about where kind of the people were in this fight, like you and Ham, and now where we're at today.
Well, you know, I try to pick my battles accordingly. Ham is as committed to this as I've ever seen anybody. He comes down to Florida. Him and I get together. We have a great relationship. He has a certain number in his head with the naked shorts. There's nobody that supports him more than me. I just feel that at some point there has to be some regulatory assistance because there's no way to win this fight by ourselves. We could keep buying and buying and buying and buying until we're all broke, until they step in and fix these broken markets. But we're going to have a problem. But, you know, I've never seen in all my years out here, the people come together and fight as one and retail united. And, you know, people are really starting to get educated. And there are plenty of naysayers out there, plenty of people saying it doesn't exist, it doesn't happen. But when we're sitting on the front lines and we watch every trade, not to go backwards, but in Astra, it's a tiny float. You only got 14 million at DTC or 16 million. We can track where those shares are. We watch them every day.
Right.
So, you know, the people are fighting and getting much stronger. Yes.
Well, we know it exists. You know, we forget about what the bashers are saying. I mean, Richard and I examined a case out of the Southern District of Texas, a bankruptcy case, Sorrento Pharmaceutical, in which the judge said, you got a counterfeit share problem. Broker dealers fessed up to it. It got settled out of court. It's over. So we know this stuff goes on. They just don't get caught enough that they look at the situation and go, we need to stop. And that's the issue. That's where our regulators fail us.
And, you know, ultimately, even if they got caught, whenever they get caught, most of the violations are just slaps on the wrist. And in terms of prosecutions, they happen so far and few in between that, you know, if you don't think you're going to get caught, then if you're corrupt, you're going to act. And there's not enough prosecutions from the DOJ. If tomorrow, and I don't know, you know, if they're responsible, but let's say for the sake of our discussion, let's say the Kramers had committed a felony and the DOJ prosecuted them and they went to prison. There would be a lot of people in the similar capacity to them that would be thinking very hard and long if they were going to do that in the future. And it would change the marketplace immediately. But unfortunately, you know, for whatever reason, I suspect my own reasons, but for whatever reason, there's a dearth of prosecutions, not just in the United States, I think everywhere. You know, you were talking about Canada, Europe. Europe appears to be a disaster when it comes to naked shorting. It appears a lot of the naked shorting in U.S. securities happens outside the United States. That's the way it appears.
A lot of it.
Yeah, that's the way it appears in MMTLP. And you're right, Ron, when you were talking about, you know, the regulators can't even regulate what's going on in the United States, let alone what's going on outside the United States. You would think they're there might be, or it would be beneficial to have some type of united regulation in the world so that this isn't a disaster everywhere. Because we kind of suspect, and I'm sure Frank, I'd like to hear your view on this, but we think it's kind of like the Matrix, the blue pill, that if you really saw what was back there, you wouldn't want to really see what's back there because it'd be so scary and frightening. I don't know how you think about that.
Listen, I'm from someone who's on the front lines and I see it every day. It's scary, but I think that the whole task of trying to unwind all these decades of this criminality is a daunting task. And you know how it is. If you uncover one, you have to admit that it exists. It's like the mafia hearings back in the 60s. They never thought there was a mafia, but as soon as one guy rolled over and said there is a mafia, then all of a sudden they had to scramble to fix it. So I think if they are actually forced to admit that this is a problem, because every case that has come to that point, they've somehow brushed it under the rug. Look at Patrick. I'm talking about Patrick with his case.
Yes.
All of a sudden, the settlement, everything is sealed. Nobody can talk about it. Dole Foods, the pineapple case, you had 18 million shares on top, and it just went away. You never hear about it. So, one situation.
Even the case that JR was mentioning, which is this year, it was a confidential settlement. So even though they specifically reference that there's naked shorts, they let them kind of resolve their issues confidentially. They weren't named in the proceedings. They kind of remained confidential in the proceedings. The only ones who were named were the brokers themselves. The brokers were named. The shorters were not. But they kind of can escape. They may have paid something. They probably didn't pay, really what they should have paid, and they don't have to go to jail. That's a good deal. But it certainly establishes that it exists. And that's the part that I find so interesting. And you were talking about it earlier, the bashers. There's a segment. Either they're shills or they believe it, one or the other, and they're just in the bashing. But it's so prevalent, really. If you have your eyes open, how could you bash this? It is so obvious.
So let's get back.
They actually did finally.
Yeah, Ron, we're getting a lot of questions specific for Ron. So let's kind of circle back, because the three of us could sit here and talk about this for the next 2 days. So Ron, one of the questions is out there. Someone would really love to hear about the Hulum market strategy, and I have to confess, I have no idea what that is either.
Yeah,
okay.
Hulum's super interesting. I've been watching for 15, 20 years, guys try to create power out of perpetual energy and magnets and spinning. There's always friction, and it doesn't ever seem to work, and great minds have worked on it. Robert Hulum came up with the idea of, and it seems simple, to amplify power. Don't create it, amplify it. Novel concept. So you're driving your car down the highway and you turn your headlights on because it's getting dark, and your alternator amplifies the power, and it runs off the battery, but it amplifies it and your headlights come on. So kind of the same concept. So you take a power in, say 100 kilowatts, you run it through a Hulum system, which he's evolved. I've got a nice video of 20 years of evolution on this equipment, to a stator unit, which there's no moving parts. From a manufacturing and use standpoint, that's a huge plus. So he's developed this thing over years where the alignment of the magnets and how the copper wires are wrapped, it amplifies the power. 100 kilowatts goes in and 100 plus comes out of it. And the big argument is over unity, they call it. Unity is 1 for 1. So the systems that he's been testing have been doing, double, triple in his shop. And this is really, like Frank mentioned earlier, this is really technical stuff. This is physics and magnetics and whatever. So I've been watching it very closely, and I know a little, but not enough to be dangerous. And what has occurred is there's been companies out of Mexico, companies out of Germany, companies out of Poland, all showing up with their engineers. you know, and it started off several months ago. Well, he's running it through Florida Power and Light into his building, a 20,000 square foot building, and it's cutting his power bill by, you know, 40, 50, 60%, which is amazing. But everybody was like, well, you're running it through the wall. It could be, you know, some kind of trick. So of late, and that's why I said back to the timing, the demonstration have been in the middle of the floor, in the middle of the shop, running off a diesel generator, running it through the system and amplifying the power. So there's no, and everybody can bring their own meters from their own places, and the engineers that are into this look at it and go, oh, it works. You know, they're trying to get their heads around it because I think it's just new territory electronically, right. But there's been consistent, it works. The one gentleman for 6 months, I've been on the phone with him for 6 months, said, and he's highly regarded in the US. He just said, no, it doesn't work. I'm not interested in even showing up there. Shows up one day with a neighboring firm that has some NASA guys on it that was building the unit, looks at it and goes, okay, this thing works. And it's disruptive, and it's doing something that is very unique that needs to be written about. And so I've watched this, and I've watched this process. So it basically amplifies power, and the applications for that are disruptive. When you consider, a car battery powering, electric car battery powering an electric engine, and in between that, you've got a suitcase-sized amplifying ILPG, inline power generator, and it puts out 200, let's say, or even less. So the 100 comes out, goes through the system, runs the engine. The other supplement goes right back around and recharges the battery. Now, do you need to stop and charge your battery?
Yeah, right. I was going to say it takes away the issue of charging. Yeah.
Well, possibly, and you can go further with it. I was in Cairo, Egypt at a clean tech conference with the US government last year. 45% of the power in Cairo, air conditioning. Grid disruption, they're at max capacity, brownouts, blackouts. Okay, so how about you just throw these in there? Or even when you've got and it just changes the dynamics of the country. Imagine the business case. You've got a 50 megawatt solar farm, and let's say you spent 30 million to build it. You put a Hulum unit on it and you double the power. So the Hulum unit costs 4 or 5. Now you've just doubled a $50 million asset. My numbers are just for example, yeah. But I mean, the potential is incredible. So we've gone as so far as to produce CADs and talk to manufacturers. There's major manufacturers in the States and in mostly around Dayton that do this for a living, and build all the generators and amplifiers for CAT, diesel, they've all looked at it, and we're costing it out. We're ready to manufacture. We've just got a Gen 2 unit. He wants to, like every inventor, he wants to see where he can dial it in to get the max out of it before stamping it. And there's a backlog, as you can imagine, of people that have gone through this process just in the time that I've been there. Like the second largest, the second largest power company in a country to the south of us, up 3 times with their engineers, and they want to use it for projects. So, some of the major power companies in the US and agencies that have been to look at it, and they're following it. So it's in an interesting position right now. And it's one of the reasons we thought maybe, Regreen has 10 years of business development, people waiting to see this demonstration. Regreen's a different animal than Hulum. They can work together, but Hulum and Regreen should be on the NASDAQ. There's some imminent potential there that I think is going to be realized to have them both qualify for the NASDAQ. There's people actually looking at Regreen that are already listed, that one of the reasons for our decision to say, hey, we're going to take it to the NASDAQ. So
is that different than your project in Tanzania?
Yeah, that's the third division. And that's kind of what we started with, which is interesting. And as I did projects in Brazil, and it's arduous doing big projects in foreign countries. The payoff is immense. I mean, if you do 5 and you get 1, you know, if it's a $400 or $500 million project and you've got 75 million shares out, you know, it just takes you to the moon. So it's interesting that Astra has kind of 3 horses in the race, and, you know, business development for years in each one of them that I think is at the point of being realized. And any one of the 30 different discussions going on is bigger than the company. So it's going to be an interesting 3-4 quarters ahead for the company because of that.
Nice. Brian, I didn't know if I interrupted you.
No, I'm monitoring the questions, and that was going to be my next one.
Okay. And anything else that you wanted to tell? I'm going to go back to Frank for a closing remark from him, but anything else you want to tell us about the company or your experience, or, you know, anything along those lines, Ron?
Well, you know, there's a lot of situations out there that there's a lot of bad actors doing bad things. This one here attracted me the most because it's such a small and contained system. There's not 300 million shares out. There's nothing convertible. There's nothing they can draw from. This is the simplest situation to catch these guys with their pants down, because it's really a suicide short. With the DTC being so small, this is a situation where most of the float, if not all, is already owned. It's in good hands. And when volume really comes into this, we can do a lot of damage to these guys, and they deserve it. So that's what I'm working on, is really trying to bring the volume up and catch these guys with their pants down and finally give them a punch in the teeth like they deserve.
And Ron, do you have any final statement you want to make about?
Yeah, I mean, look,
how do you follow that up?
Yeah, you know what? That's part of it. Like I said, there's the business, most importantly, and then there's the market. Now, I have full confidence in Frank. His loyalty is incredible, and his tenacity. So I think we're in great hands there. And we do have a situation where those guys could be in very big trouble in that, you know, in a short period of time, because it's not a complicated structure, and there's going to be no gray areas with a spin out and an account, and the size of the potential transactions is enormous. If you have 75 million shares out and you do a $75 million deal, of which the discussions are way beyond that, you know, it's $1 a share gross revenue. So where does that put things? So people that are down here shorting, I mean, it's not fundamentally, we want to run a good company and get into creating shareholder value. Spin out, beautiful way to double print everybody's positions. Both companies have the chops to be on a higher exchange, and that will, again, you know, support Frank's efforts in helping us in that regard. But yeah, it's a good company. I've been involved since 2005. It's a good company with some enormous potential, and I think it's being realized, you know, as we work through this process, you know, immediately. In fact, so our job, you know, we forget our job. It's like politicians; they forget their job. You know, they get caught up on ego and what they can make, and they forget the people are paying for them, and the people put them there. Mm-hmm. That's not lost on any of us. Look, we're doing a job. We're stakeholders as well. We're vested as well. You know, I put my money into this and paid out the note, and you know, I most of the team's the same way. They're vested. We want to build a company. We want to make money. We want to have fun and make money and do good. And all the people that supported us make money too. Create abundance versus a scarcity mentality, which you've heard about on this call. It's an abundance mentality, creating a success and abundance and enjoying it. That's our program.
Richard, there's one thing I wanted to add that's of great importance. A lot of the questions coming in to me are, if they get orders or they start projects, how do they pay for it? Are they going to dilute the stock? Ron, I'd like you to just tell people, when orders come in for Regreen or Hulum, are you going to dilute the stock? And if not, how do you plan to get the money to pay for those things?
Well, it's like no difference than a small store. So on a purchase order for Hulum, generally what's been happening is people want to buy a couple units and then they'll do a big order for a couple thousand units. They want to make sure it fits in there like a cell tower. They have a certain way to run the cell tower and it draws a certain way and has to, operate remotely. So what they'll do is they'll buy a couple, but everything we sell is more than 50% down. There's more than 100% margin in it at the manufacturing stage. Now, what's interesting about that, both Hulum and Regreen, what's not reflected on the audited financials is Regreen, the cost of those goods. There's 3 or 4 systems there that are paid for that are worth, 15 million a piece for the 15-ton systems when they're installed. So there's equipment that we sell and we get 50% down. So do we need funding if we do a $50 million purchase order? We get 25 million down and there's 100% margin in it. I think we're good. The second thing is when we put those that equipment in some instances into a project like we're in discussions on many of these projects in Regreen because there's been so many years of development. We own part of the project, a carried interest in the project. So we make the hit on the equipment and then we got a residual revenue in the project. I come from residual revenues, wind and solar. So we want to charge a royalty, a license fee recurring, have the pyramid like Coca-Cola, best distribution model on the planet, and we want to make a profit on the equipment. That's our business model.
Okay. Now, just I'm going to throw out there, JR and I are too dumb to have read the financials, and so we don't know the numbers, so we can't vouch for anything. Like we say all the time, we preface everything we say on every video as we know nothing and we don't vouch for anything. So we'll just continue that as a caveat. Is there anything else you want to ask, JR?
No, I'm good. I was, again, just monitoring the questions, making sure people have the opportunity. So,
okay. Well, we wish you guys, both of you, and we wish Astra certainly well. If you want to kind of bring us up to date in the progress as you go down the line, we'd be happy to have you back to kind of see how things are going. And, it sounds like a great mission and ultimately a benefit to society as a whole. And hopefully you can make some money doing it too. And investors, hopefully they can make some money doing it also. And Frank, I appreciate you kind of stepping up and appearing today. And if you have other projects that you want to talk about in the future, we'd be happy to consider that. And we appreciate you making yourself available here today also. And Brian, thank you. And to the people that watched out there or who will watch in the future, we hope you received any information. And I'm sure if you need additional information, you could look at the Astra website or call somebody and they'll answer any questions you have to your satisfaction. Yeah. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining us. And I thank our guests tonight.
Richard, thank you, JR. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Richard and Brian. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Bye now.